I'm your host, Scary Pops. Everybody loves a good scare. So let's get into it.
Personally, I haven't seen one goddamn psycho killer.
A family of four, two young children and their parents were traveling on the road when all of a sudden their car broke down. The parents said they were going to go out and look for help, and they wanted the kids to stay behind and that they would leave the radio on in case they got bored. Soon it was nightfall, but the parents have still to return, so the children sat in the dark, but they continued to listen to the radio. Just then, they heard a bulletin update alarm go through. And they grew alarmed when they heard that a dangerous killer was on the loose, having escaped from a prison nearby. The newsreader warned listeners to take extreme care when going about their business. Suddenly, silence turned to a knock on the car roof. The noise grew louder and faster. Unable to bear it any longer, the kids opened the door and they ran. They ran as fast as they could, but the eldest dared to turn around to see their source of their fear. It was a man on the roof. He was bouncing two objects on the top of the vehicle, and as he looked, he could tell it was his parents' heads. Here's a story about a man named Joseph Taylor who's going on a business trip, but he will soon learn that 1 is not his favorite number. Joseph stayed at a large house some friends owned on the outskirts of the city, and that night he had a pleasant evening chatting and reminiscing about the past. But when Joseph went to bed, he began to toss and turn and was unable to sleep. And at one point during the night, he heard a car pull into the driveway. He went to the window to see who might be arriving at such a late hour. And in the moonlight, he saw a black hearse full of people. The driver looked up at him, and he saw his strange face. Just then, the driver called, "There's room for one more." He then waited a minute or two before driving off. In the morning, Joseph told his friends what had happened. "Oh, you're just dreaming, that's all." "Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe that must have been it. But it sure didn't seem like a dream." And after breakfast, he left for town and spent the day in the office of a new high-rise building in the city. Well, later in the afternoon, he was ready to go back to the house, and he was waiting for the elevator to take him down to the ground floor. But when it stopped at his floor, it opened up. The elevator was very full when it stopped at his floor. One of the people inside looked at him and said, "There's room for one more." It was the driver of the hearse. "No, thank you," said Joseph. "I'll wait for the next one." Just then the doors closed and the elevator began to descend. The doors closed and the elevator began to descend. Moments later, there was a terrible crash. Shouts and screams could be heard. The elevator had collapsed. All the people inside were dead.
Winter is my favorite season of the year. There's just something about the feeling of snow falling and holidays that puts me in a good mood all throughout. However, I live in a fairly cold state, often causing tons of snowfall during these winter months. Being a DoorDash driver part-time for almost 3 years at the time, it would make this job much more difficult as the roads would take a while to get plowed, and even when they did, the heavy snowfall would just cover up the roads again. While it made the job dangerous and sometimes even impossible, I still usually chose to drive on days of heavy snow and covered roads. Reason being, nobody else would be out on the road, and other DoorDash drivers would likely stay home, giving me access to a lot more orders and the possibility to make more money. Plus, customers tend to tip more, as they know they're putting you through a lot by ordering for delivery during a blizzard. All was the same that year, and it was the middle of December when a night of heavy snowfall came around. I wasn't able to start deliveries until 7 or 8 due to my other job, but as soon as I was able, I began driving. Like usual, very few cars were on the road, and my DoorDash app was giving me high-paying offers for delivery. I did 2 relatively quick orders and was on my way back from a house before the snowfall worsened. The visibility was awful, and the roads were not being plowed often enough. My car wasn't a piece of junk. It had all-wheel drive and all-season tires, but this snow was really making me struggle. I slowed to a stop sign and was barely even able to start moving again as my tires just spun under me. Finally passing through the intersection, another order popped up on my phone. I looked at it for a second, fighting with myself whether or not to do it, before eventually rejecting it and closing the app. The roads were too dangerous, even for me. The specific street I was on wasn't very far from the main town, so my goal was to just get as close to town as possible, hoping that more snowplows had uncovered the roads. I drove slowly, going 20 on a 45. As I rolled through the poor conditions, I barely made out something large in the middle of the road ahead of me. Having been unable to see it until it was too late, I slammed on the brakes, and while my car had stopped in time, the back tires slid behind me and dragged my car off the road and into a thick layer of snow. Thankfully, it was a soft, low-speed crash, but it didn't help the state I was in. My car was completely stuck in the snow now, and I knew I'd need assistance. I gathered myself together, remaining calm and collected, then turned my hazard lights on and took my phone to call for roadside assistance. I gave the man my location, who then said it would take about 15 to 20 minutes for him to arrive. I happily agreed and thanked him. Leaning back in my seat, I was glad I hadn't accepted any orders, since it would make this whole thing a lot more complicated. A few minutes went by as I just sat there watching the snowfall, before noticing a flickering light in my side mirror. It was hard to see, but I was able to make out that it was an orange light, flashing softly and coming towards me. As it got closer and parked on the side of the road behind me, it looked like a typical work vehicle with the caution lights on top. Looking back at my phone, it had only been 4 minutes since I called, so this guy was really early, but I wasn't about to complain about someone for coming early to dig me out of a ditch. After waiting in my car for another couple minutes, I heard a door slam shut behind me and saw a man walking toward my window. Once he was a few feet away, I rolled it down a few inches.
"Hi, sir. Did you need assistance here?"
he said.
"Yeah, I called a few minutes ago. I just needed help getting back on the road,"
I responded, though it felt a bit weird explaining myself as the situation was pretty obvious.
"Right. Let me see what I can do for you."
The man walked around to the back of my car and began inspecting it, assumingly looking for a place to set up the hook. Now, I've never done this before, but I always assume they attach a winch to your car and drag you out. I had no idea where they attached it or anything, or even if that's what they actually do. The man stood behind the car for a bit as I watched in the rearview mirror. Then, a sudden rush of cold air shot through as the man had opened the trunk. I looked back and saw him holding the trunk half open while scanning the inside of my vehicle with his eyes.
Sorry,
He muttered, slamming the trunk closed. Again, I didn't know how this process worked, but it was really weird that he randomly opened my trunk like that. I couldn't think of a reason that he'd possibly need to open it for. My suspicions started rising, noticing he was clueless, and I started putting pieces together. I quickly called the roadside assistance number again. A few rings went by as I waited anxiously before the same man as last time picked up. My stomach dropped.
Hey, I'm just a couple minutes away. Did you need something else?
Just then, the guy came back up to my window, telling me that he needed my keys and for me to exit the vehicle for a minute while he prepared it. I kept the phone by my ear, then awkwardly told the guy that I just needed a minute as I was on the phone. He didn't respond, but rather just stood there watching me, as if wanting to listen to my conversation. I was trying my best not to panic. With the guy still next to my door, I rolled the window up. The man immediately began knocking on the window, asking me what I was doing in a rather aggressive tone. I then locked the doors, and as soon as he heard that, he tried pulling my door open and began yelling at me. I was terrified, knowing I couldn't go anywhere. As this was going on, I heard another door slam shut from the truck behind me and saw another man running towards my car with something in his hand. Then, an extremely loud horn blared from behind us, followed by bright lights shining at my car. The two men ran back to their truck and immediately drove away, revealing the roadside assistance truck. Two men got out and came up to make sure that I was okay. Apparently I'd left the call on, and the men heard what was going on, so they rushed to help me. Also, after notifying the police, I found out that there were multiple cases very similar to mine that happen when we get heavy snowfall. The men supposedly drive around looking for people that are stuck, then steal their cars and rob them while pretending to be roadside assistants. I wouldn't even doubt if they were the ones that put that large object in the street that caused me to swerve and slide off the road. I'm lucky for the way the events played out though, and I don't think I'll ever drive in bad conditions again.